Hey everybody, welcome to the Roots Podcast. I am your host, Sean Pitcher. Today's guest we have on is Joel Totoro. He is the Director of Sports Science at Thorne Health Tech. Joel is one of the OGs in sports nutrition. We will get into a discussion about that as we kind of go along throughout the podcast. But he's kind of one of those pioneers that's been around with that original group that kind of started out sports nutrition from the very beginning. But like any podcast, Joel, I want to start out with, what are your roots?
Yeah, that's a loaded question at this age, right? But yeah, so I started my career in actually in clinical nutrition, ICU trauma, but before that I went to the University of Connecticut. I started as a pharmacy major. I knew I wanted to do something in science. Wasn't sure that med school ortho was right for me, and kind of at that time PT was super saturated. That was kind of at my age or my generation. That was kind of where you started in sports. And nutrition wasn't really something that was on my radar initially until I took my first class, and I was like, wait, this is actually what I want to do. Like, it's not the pharmaceutical side, it's the nutrition making an impact on the biological level, all that fun nerdy stuff. But at the time it wasn't really a profession. You could be a consulting with some side gigs, or work with marathoners, or there was team and training, which is kind of supporting cancer. um but it wasn't a full-time gig unless you went academic. And I was super fortunate my senior year at UConn. Dr. Jeff Volek came over with William Kramer and the whole exercise physiology group from Ball State, which were kind of the number one group in the country. So I got to meet him. He was a male dietitian, for real, the first one I'd ever met in person. And he was kind of matching. He has a PhD in exercise physiology, but he's also an RD. So I was like, this is what I want to do. All right. So I'm not the only one that sees this vision, because when you live in a bubble, a small, I went to, UConn's in the middle of the corner of Connecticut. You don't interact with all that many people. So it was the first person to see, like, oh, this is somebody doing it way better than I had even pictured. So, I was talking to him, and he's like, yeah, this is something. He's like, go clinical if that's what you want to do. He's like, but you won't be there long. Like, everything you're saying is where the industry needs to go. So kind of did that, and loved the ICU. It was awesome. You get kind of data, and then you respond the next day. And you're an interdisciplinary team, so as you can imagine, moving over to sports, same exact kind of thing. It's just, I always say I traded life and death for wins and losses. But a couple years into my clinical work, I got a call from Volek that this guy, and it was Dave Ellis, was going to be calling me. And the Patriots, which were the local team, were looking for somebody. And so I thought I was going in to give, like a training camp talk or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
got there, interviewed on the sideline. It's like pouring rain, like you'll do anything you want. And so I got there, started. We didn't lose the first game after I started, and then the next week they were like, can you just quit your job? And I was like, absolutely. So
They're like, we found a hidden gem. We're going to keep this person if we're winning like this.
yeah. And from there, so I did that for 8 seasons, and then moved over to the University of Michigan to do, they were building a high performance lab, so I got to be involved in that. And then my passion has always been hockey as well. I think it's such a nutrient necessary sport. So they had an amazing program there, so I got to work there. And then basketball, men's and women's. So I get to kind of open my eyes to some other things besides football, because after 12 seasons of football, you're kind of you've made a lot of the corrections, right? And then when that was kind of ending, our AD got fired, and the football staff was let go, and we got a new president, and it was just like, it's time for a clean break. And at that time, Thorne was kind of starting up this sports science or sport nutrition side of things. And they were like, are you interested? And I was like, actually, yeah, like I kind of want to be part of doing it right in the supplement industry, because it, in my mind, hadn't really been done at the level it needed to. So, and that was 8 years ago. So I've been running with that ever since.
That's awesome. To go back to one of the things you said in the very beginning, do you feel like having that base level clinical background played a big role as you transitioned into the sports nutrition realm, with being able to
Yeah,
handle possibly some situations there may have popped up in the athlete population?
100%. And more than I even realized at the time that I was doing it. But so kind of when we started, and this is back in 2004, you know, uh, we were all just lucky enough to see Louise Burke, but she was the only one doing real applied nutrition research. So you had to look at trauma, and then you had to look at performance. Like rugby had a lot of studies, and I was like, that's as close as I can get to football. But I had to pull and guess from those kind of things. But as I got into it, the way I kind of always explain it is that sports is intentional trauma, right? We're doing body to the damage to the body, or we're asking it to go above and beyond baseline. And when you stop and you look, metabolically, biological, look at the lab work, like your body doesn't care whether it ran a marathon or, it's just dealing with something. So and the great thing about intentional trauma is it's going to happen, right? So you can have a plan for it. So yeah, the way I've summed up my kind of what I do is, all right, all your body wants to do is not die, right? It's a survival machine. So
Yeah.
what are you doing that's you're asking your body above and beyond? What's the biological cost of the activity you're asking it to do, whether it's physical, cognitive, whatever? What's the biological cost of that? So what needs to be true nutrient wise before you do it? What do you need during you're doing the activity? And then what do you need to put back in? And that's kind of like, I would say it's like the most simple yet complicated machine in the world, right? But yeah, so that's kind of for sure everything. I still do medical nutrition therapy. You look at blood work, you look at these kind of things, and there has to be that kind of clinical research based component to everything you do, or else you're kind of just guessing, and you owe it to your clients to not be guessing.
Yeah, I always say to my athletes all the time, like especially if they don't want to do certain stuff, I go, would you rather guess about what's going on with your body externally, internally, or would you rather me actually know what's going on so I can do something about it in the right progression, in the right way, right?
Yeah,
And
and
you coin it and put it that way, it makes a little bit more sense to them. It's a little bit more simpler, even though there still might be a little bit of resistance to it. At the same time, they're like, all right, this individual is actually trying to like help me because he wants to guide me in the right direction with the data that's actually available that he could take.
yeah, and I think getting people to understand it's just an informed decision. Like it's like 20 years ago we didn't have load monitoring, we didn't have any of this stuff. We weren't even tracking workouts. Workouts were like optional 25 years ago, right? Like I always joke like I'm old enough that like when I was coming up, it was like hydrating was for the weak during practice.
Yeah,
Like that's
take
how
a
that's
salt
how
tablet. You're not going to get water for 3 hours and just deal with it.
yeah, but for me, like we're all at the core scientists, so I want to prove that it's working too. Like if I'm giving you an intervention, I want to see that it's working. You want to see that's working, and like it's one thing to say what you're feeling, but like some of the changes aren't necessarily like immediate. Like oh yeah, I feel better. So the more you can kind of quantify, it's just you go from that shotgun approach to the sniper, and it's just that's where you make some of the best adaptations.
And it just helps us as dietitians begin to grow value in what we
Mhm.
do. I mean, with this shift going into sports science, collecting data, analyzing it, and then as we kind of progress along, being able to provide that back to the athlete in real time. I
Yeah.
found having the exposure and fortunate and in the last place I was at and the current place I'm at is dedicated to that piece of the puzzle. And now I call it my receipts. I always have my receipts. If a parent, a
Yeah.
coach, an athlete, somebody comes at me and says, I'm not progressing in the way that I want, well, let's go look at the data that I collected over the last year. And I can show you directly at these points in time why this isn't happening or this isn't working and how we need to change it. And then put the ownership back on them at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's why I love nutrition. It's like we're kind of the glue guy on the high performance team or the clinical team when it was, on that side, because nutrition touches everything, right? So if you're collecting all this data, like what's the so what? So many times we're the so what or one of the solutions for the so what. Like I always
Mm-hmm.
say there's it's relatively hard to overtrain an athlete. It's very easy to under recover them, right? So I think a lot of times we miss that and get so hung up on, all these different things. And I was like, all right, well, I mean, rarely is coach ever going to change practice. So if that's true, what do we need to do to make that as sustainable as possible and let people be progressing day after day?
Yeah, how do I work around it before leading up to the practice and after the practice, or what do I provide in the environment to hopefully maximize my potential for athletes to hopefully utilize what we're giving them if we can't control the uncontrollables, unfortunately.
And we have 20 hours of the day, they've got four. Whatever you do to them, I have to account for the rest of the day. But that's I always, I always say so much of this job is marketing your ideas to the athlete and coaches, but it's out recover your opponent. A lot like most of the at the elite level, most of the people have the same training facilities. They have the same general ideas, the same data, but like, all right, what are you doing with that? And that's where you can kind of really make some changes that you can kind of get an edge on other people.
And that's what I'll say too, whether it's certain practitioners almost don't want to give up some of their information or tricks or tips. It's like at the end of the day, it really comes down to the practitioner. Like I'm all about having conversations, chatting, sharing like what we're doing at my facility, but that doesn't mean that dietitian, that other person is going to be able to do it the same way that I'm able to provide it to the athletes. So it's like
Yeah.
I think sometimes like why are we trying to hide stuff? Like why aren't we just trying to help each other to then help each other,
Yeah.
help all of our athletes at the end of the day?
That's been one of the nice things about being outside of team sports is I'm supporting everybody, right? So I have no
Yeah.
secrets. I'll share everything. But I always say like, hey man, like we all have access to biology, right? We work off biology, right? Like,
Mm.
there's advances that happen, but they're publicly available to everybody, right? So it's not like I've got a scheme that's different, right?
Yeah.
Like you could be doing everything I'm doing, right? So it's just a matter of, are you supported by your department? Are you selling it correctly? Are you understanding it? Are you interpreting everything correctly? So yeah, the baseline, the playbook is there. It's been there for hundreds of years, right? So it's just a matter of how you interact with that and how that fits your specific philosophy and team and whatnot. So yeah, I'm as open as possible with like, hey, if you're a peanut butter on one side of the bread guy and I'm a two side of the bread, hey man, that's just personal preference, right?
I'll say peanut butter on two sides is a legit way to go because the jelly does not come out the sides. If
I mean,
anyone,
100%. Yeah, right.
and
Yeah.
it's funny because we did a PB and J making contest, and I didn't tell the athletes how to make the PB and Js. I just watched them make it, and I was like, your PB and J is gonna be weak in like 2-3 hours if it sits in the refrigerator. And they're all super competitive. So like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? I'm like, well, that bread's not protected, so that jelly's gonna go right through it. And they were just like shocked by it.
I mean, you can go next level and throw that third slice in the middle, but that's whew.
That's
You gotta be ready for that. It's not for the weak.
that sounds like something my father would have done. um, can you speak on the growth of sports nutrition in general? I mean, I think it was you or maybe it was another dietitian that was kind of part of that initial group. I mean, you had said like there's like 15, 20 of you. And then now, at our last conference that we had, the conference sold out. I think there was 500 or more dietitians at the conference. So it just seems like in the last 10, 15 years, I mean, the field has really just exploded. And there's been more support and more organizations and universities finally buying into what we do.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's just the growth of the profession for sure. When I started in '04, I knew Volek, my professor. I had met Dave Ellis, and then it was me and the pros, and I think maybe 10 full-time dietitians in college. And there may have been one or two at the Olympic and military, and that were close to full-time, if not full-time. But that was it as far as full-time dietitians go. Now, people have been talking about sports nutrition for years, and there was basically kind of like every city had their go-to consultant that was everything. But the idea of it, being integrated and being full-time and being day-to-day responsive and really encompassing everything that dietetics does, that was a new idea. And honestly, when Bill kind of went to his agent, shared an agent with Tom Osborne. Tom Osborne was the first one, and he had himself like bad blood work or suboptimal blood work on his like cholesterol or whatever, and got into nutrition. And Dave was working him as a strength coach, doing nutrition as well, and he was like, "Wait, tell me more." And Dave's like, "Wait, yeah, there's a ton we can do." So, but they saw it as a competitive advantage. It was something nobody else was doing. We had strength coach has been fully integrated for a decade there. Athletic medicine as well. Sports psych is kind of in the same journey as sports nutrition, whereas some of the best people we're seeing that was an area of opportunity and just supporting the body of what we're asking to do. So yeah, but at that time, then we had we drafted somebody from Texas A&M, and so Amy Bragg reached out to me. She was doing it down there, and then so now I knew three people in the industry. But the industry as a whole wasn't super supportive of the idea that it was a full-time job, that you could do this, or that there was a need, to fill 40 hours a week. And it's sports. We know it's not 40, but, so it was kind of a couple of us doing it in a way. And we were all young and just kind of, most of us were, dual credential. They're, working in strength and working in nutrition and just kind of trying to establish the need for it. And once anybody sees it, they're like, oh, Yeah, no, of course we should have had this 10 years ago, right? But
Mm.
it was just a matter of kind of that organic growth and enough passionate people in the industry. I would say you can't hide passion. So when you're there in the moment doing it, your athletes can see that you're there to help them. Coaches can see that you're making a difference. And then, it's either somebody comes up from the college and is like, hey, where's your dietitian? Or, we had, one of our staff members went to another team, as head coach, created my position there. And that's how it grows. And, we went from, it's probably 2008 is the first time those of us who were doing it or 2006 was the first time we all were randomly like meeting in the lobby of another conference because we're like, wait, what are you doing with this? Like no one else, I can't ask anybody else. So
Yeah.
we went from, maybe 15 of us then to what it is now. And it's all just by establishing, both having an impact, but also like establishing that kind of relevancy and how that it's a whole in a lot of teams performance. You have to account for everything to be elite.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with Anthony Zamora. We all did an episode together, and a lot of those, let's say, old hat or older coaches, probably the next 5-10 years are eventually going to get pushed, start going away from obviously their respected sport, and we're having more of these coaches now surrounded by us, strength coaches, mental, sports psych. So now it's almost going to kind of be the norm to have those type of support staff around you, or obviously we can see a lot at some of the pro levels. Not every pro organization has a full-time dietitian or the appropriate staff that they need. So then it becomes, like you said, when they're going from team to team and they see the standard and level of nutrition quality that you had at your place, and then they go to another place that doesn't have it. Well, how do we make this happen? Because I know what benefits this has on the athletes and how this can help us be a step ahead of everybody else. Or we're going to be behind if we don't have these type of individuals as a part of our team, because and from the last history that we saw with our team, like we're not winning. So is this like the piece of the puzzle that's going to like push us ahead so we can get over that hump?
Yeah, and that's absolutely how a lot of the college growth happened for two of the things you mentioned. One, there's some people that have now grown up, as assistants or whatever. And, the people who were interns with me 20
Mm-hmm.
years ago in New England are head coaches, GMs, whatever. Like, so they now don't know a life without it. Right.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, in college, it was just like, you're going to out recruit, you're going to out recover, you're going to outperform because like if I'm choosing between you two and these two schools and one has a strong nutrition program that's going to support my athlete and one doesn't, I'm like, well, what else are you not doing? Right. So yeah, it's 100% how it grows. And, that's kind of a big picture. We also kind of had didn't really necessarily, I mean, we knew it at the time, didn't realize the impact was you have a responsibility of the profession to be that expert and to show, be the best and be as up on the research and supporting the team as much as you can. So and it's hard, it's hard. The sports life is hard. There's, a ton more lows than there are highs, so it just takes a certain person that's driven a certain way to stay in it. And, I'm stealing from Rob Skinner here, but he says a version of, if you're no longer living your dream, like get out of the way and let somebody else's dream. Right. So like if the team's asking for more than you have time for, when it goes from consulting to full time, like if you're not able to meet those needs, like I think there's a responsibility of the profession to let somebody come in that is willing to do it or advocate for that second position that can do what you need to do, but don't, you can't ever let progress stop because of your bandwidth, which is not a word I love, but
Yeah, I just don't overextend yourself. If
yeah,
if these are the X amount of services you can provide based off the amount of hours you have in a week, or the hours that you can give back to also have a good work-life balance at the same time, because we
yeah,
know there's times and situations and programs where that may or may not happen. We also know that there's sports where there's just parts of the years and months where you're going to be super busy regardless, and there's probably not much you can do about that. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's
yeah,
a
for
thankless,
sure.
it's a thankless job at times. You're not always going to get thank you and recognition, and not everyone athlete's going to appreciate you all the time. But you got to be able to, and pat yourself on the back that you are doing a great job and continue to keep moving on, even if no one else sees that in their eyes.
Yeah, and this is a me philosophy. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I'm of the opinion that, sports performance, sports science, we're in the service industry, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not, I don't ever want to be the star. Like I said, 12 seasons of football, I had 0 carries for 0 yards, like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't win a single game. Like have I, supported efforts to not lose a game for sure. Right. And I'm not trying to minimize the role, but like You have to be in it for the right reasons. It is all of us that are in it and stay in it. We have an altruistic bone. We have a drive to serve that I think we may not even understand why, but yeah, for sure, it's a service industry, and you are part of the piece that makes everybody better. And there's something about that works for me, but it's not for everybody. If that's not filling your cup to offset some of the things that you're giving up to be in sports and elite sport, then it's okay. There's a ton of different ways to make impact.
Yeah, I tell my guys, I'm here to serve you. I'm here if you're willing to let me invest in you. So
it's awesome.
You come to me whenever you want. I'm going to be able to help you out whenever you need, while you're in this opportunity, in this space with me during that time. But then it's like, you got to be willing to use the tools and actually apply them and do something with them. Like I can't 100%. Hold your hand and drag you through it, even though some athletes may want that to happen at times. But I keep talking about, especially now with like NIL deals and business, and these guys making a lot of money. It's like, what are you doing right now to let all these practitioners invest in you? So that when you get later on, college to pros, you now have this toolbox that's just exploding with all these things that you've learned, that now maybe you're saving money because you invested early on, and now you don't have to spend as much money on all these different practitioners because you have the ability and the self-sufficiency to hopefully do that yourself.
I mean, how many athletes have you worked with? Like, man, where were you back in the day? Or I
Yeah.
had you, I'd be like, all right, well, hey, that's not an excuse anymore. You got to find us and you got to use us. Right. Yeah. 100%.
So talking about research, can you tell the audience, what is Thorne? Where did it come from? How did it start? Just maybe a brief background about that.
Yeah, so Thorne's a super unique company. And like, honestly, if you'd asked me, 10, 15 years ago, if I'd ever be working on the supplement side, knowing, what we know about the supplement industry, I would have told you absolutely not. But so Thorne's been around for almost 40 years. And for the first 30, you had to go through a healthcare practitioner. So that's how I found them. Honestly, I needed just a good magnesium in a form that wasn't going to compromise GI, right? As we kept, finally started getting some blood work on magnesium, saw how low some of these numbers were. But yeah, so Thorne's a little bit different. So they kind of the founder of the company doesn't think anyone should blindly take supplements. So that's why it was always through a healthcare practitioner. But enough of us on the sports side were like, hey, you guys are already making this quality, that we look for. Can you certify some of your products? Like, this is a need. So we kind of launched that, but they were smart to launch with, the team we've built. There's, 5 of us on the sports team that have been around forever. And we all come from different aspects of, from, Olympics to strength and conditioning to myself. But I'm one of probably at this point 40 healthcare practitioners at Thorne. So we have that, we don't just have an advisory board, we just hire them full time. Right. So, which is great for me because I don't have to be the smartest man on the island in every single aspect, so like as gut health goes, like, I've said this, I think I said it to you, like I get to be the dumbest guy on those calls. Right. And I get to take notes and have homework. So the fact that Thorne is kind of invested in the, has a healthcare legacy and, does a ton of research, external research, lets other people research our projects. We're partnered with, Mayo Clinic's one of the people we do research with, and they're just one of like all these different amazing medical entities we work with. And now as we're starting to do some research, I just shared with you at the last conference where we're about to publish some research on, kind of one of our brain health products and subconcussive hits on youth hockey players. So we get to let other people research our products in the actual population we're using them in. So that to me was kind of checked all my boxes of like, all right, this is a company I can go do cool things with. So it's fun, so the legacies and supplement, but we're kind of always looking at, what's validated, what can I learn from a finger stick, a saliva swab, or a urine sample at home without going to lab? What is blood work telling us? How does that tie into the biome? So really just trying to I like to empower the athlete to be, I would say you have to be the CEO of you, right? But empower the athlete or the client or the patient to be making those healthcare decisions for themselves and being like an informed champion for themselves. So that's kind of the mission of Thorne, is to provide education and the means for you to make the best healthcare decisions you can.
So you mentioned team. What does that team consist of? So is it sports dietitians? Is it doctors? Is it researchers? Like, what does that team essentially look like?
It's everything from medical doctors, DOs, naturopaths, kind of with their kind of functional medicine aspect. We've got a ton of PhDs, dietitians. It's kind of all over the board. It's anyone we're working with where we have a void of expertise, we just kind of bring them in. And then you start adding the secondary group of, if it's not one of our people that's an expert, one of our partners has an expert in that. So again, the level of people I get to interact with every day, I'm talking to people. I was like, I've read your work for years, and like I fanboy over them, So yeah, no, it's just a wildly fulfilling position. And I always joke, my job is to do all the things I was going to do in the off season, read all the papers, have all these conversations, make sure I'm aware. So it's just a really great company, and we're super supported by management, and they understand the kind of responsibility we have to both, whether it's on the clinical side or the sports side, of making sure that everything we put out is based in science, has that why behind it. We have the receipts, because there's a ton of things in development that we're just not ready to put out there until the supporting evidence is more robust. So the fact that those decisions are made and kind of just the vision of the company is what brought me here.
I know, and usually when it comes to research, I'm always shooting you a text and trying to find out like what's going on right now, Joel. They're like, hey, I have a question on this specific topic, this specific supplement. Like, do you have anything on there I can read about? I have, besides you have like 2 or 3 other people as well, but it's just, especially when you're really busy during the season, like you need something really quick, like you and a lot of other dietitians have reached out to, have been a great resource, like right off the bat, where I can go to you, you have something right there ready to go, send it to me, I can read it, and then like, all right, is there enough information that's qualified or allows me to apply this in this setting, in the environment that I'm in right now?
Yeah, and that goes back to what we talked about, like the growth of the profession and kind of how great it is, how sharing it is. What became CPSDA, like I said, it was a handful of us meeting, before a conference and then on our own. And that group, I still have a group text. I mean, it started as a Yahoo email group. That's how old we are. But now we have a group text, and I'm still legitimately weekly like, hey, I'm not an idiot, right? I'm reading this correctly, or like, who's got a protocol on this? Like, because when it does come time to justify your program, and you may have 18 hours to be like, all right, so prove it. All right, you've got my ear. This is the only time we're doing the budget all year. You have to be like, all right, who's got this? Who's got that? How do I sell this? How do I quantify this? How do I put a value on that? And that's where, kind of the companionship and the fellowship of our profession, I think is wildly unique across really any profession.
Yeah, it's just like I reached out to a dietitian the other day. I've never done international travel, and our team is possibly planning something like that in the future. And I was like, how do I ship stuff over there? How do we bring stuff over there? Like, does this country have X, Y, and Z? And all it took was a quick text back and forth, told me exactly what I need to know, and then I can bring it over to ops or bring it over to our team. And now it's like, now we don't have to really guess or figure it out or like struggle. There's so many people in the field. There's so many contacts I can reach out to. It takes a couple seconds, and then we get the answer that we need to move forward and actually provide the athletes what they need in that new and different space for them.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing, is when you're going into something you've never done, you don't even know the questions to ask, right? Like, there was a time when I was at New England where the Patriots going to play a game in Beijing like a year before the Olympics, and I knew nothing. Like, I know nothing of that region. So Karen Daigle, who was the Olympic dietitian at the time, doesn't know me from Adam, picks up the phone, walks me through everything she's doing. And she's like, hey, she's like, here's the quality, vendors. But she's like, even then, even if it's quality, like their animals eat something different. The soil's different. So even the best plan, she's like, there's gonna be a GI reaction, so you have to account for that, or you're just gonna get blamed, right? Like, the food was bad. Well, no, like the environment was bad. There's nothing I could control there, but like, again, it's knowing what you're going into. So 100%, that's where it's such a valuable to be. Like, I would say we're experts in this field when we've been asked more questions and made more mistakes, right? And Karen was able to, and we ended up canceling that trip, but it set me up for when we played in London. But Karen saved me from making mistakes that I didn't even know I was going to make. So that's the collective wisdom of a powerful professional group.
It's like with our athletes, they come in, like sometimes we get upset because they don't know certain stuff, but if you just don't know and no one's taught you, you never had the experience, like, what are you supposed to do? It's either trial by fire, or in that case, you have to ask somebody that's been in that situation before.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's such a fulfilling profession, and yeah, it's just great to see it grow.
So can you kind of go in depth about what is your specific role? Is it just an education portion? Is it getting research out to dietitians, talking about how supplements get, like, what is that job essentially entail as director of sports science?
Yes, to all of the above. Yeah. No, so it's a pretty unique position, and it's kind of grown as we've seen what people need. So um obviously it's understanding the products and understanding being up on the science and understanding where that fits in. And like I said, we're an education first company, so it's like, hey, gut health is important. I have to know, here's the behavioral changes to make, here's the food changes to make, when are supplements the answer or an option, right?
Mhm.
So it's part of it is staying up on that and kind of like being responsible to myself and to the company. But a lot of it is kind of supporting all our partners. Like, we're partnered with UFC. They have a huge performance team. So it's more kind of how you and I work. Like, hey, what's the support on this? Or hey, we're looking at this, or we're looking at these biometrics, anything we need to look at there, right? But then there's other partners or individuals where they don't have a performance team, and I'm the whole performance team for them,
Yeah.
So it's really just a matter of, hey, I'm kind of the conduit to all our expertise and all the professionals we have at Thorne, and being able to be like, hey, this is not my expertise. Let me connect you with this person. But it really is supporting everyone we work with to be able to do their best practice at the highest level. And then there's a little bit like as we're coming out with you were getting an early sample. People have asked us for a pre-workout for years, and we've been kind of like hesitant about it until we found a formula we thought was what we would want in it, right? So there's some input there in research and design, and it's not like I'm doing this in a bubble. It's collective. What are you
Yeah.
hearing? What are people hearing from the field? But it is kind of having some input and some thought leadership there. And then we have like nobody's just an athlete, or nobody's just we'll have somebody working with a diabetic on the clinical side, and they're like, oh yeah, but they're also a triathlete. What am I missing? So it's supporting our internal team, and just it's really just kind of getting to be an expert and knowing what my kind of niche is. And then like, this is available for the company wherever you need it. Do I need to go on a podcast? Do I need to write a blog? Are we working with a new orthopedic group that has some questions about post-surgical best practices, right? So it's really anywhere my years of expertise can be applied, which is awesome. And it's
Plus, it-
crazy what that looks like, what those asks are, and you've been a sports dietitian. Like I was, I worked with male football players, and then my third year our strength coach had his wife had gestational diabetes with twins, and I was like, all right, that's been since sophomore year of college. Let me
yeah,
ping
it's
my
pretty hard to
experts. Yeah,
recall.
yeah. So you never know. We drafted a guy that was diagnosed with I believe it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma during the combine process, and I was like, okay, oncology again, right? So,
Mhm.
like I said earlier, nutrition touches everything, and so you never know where you're going to be asked, and that's the pressure of being a dietitian, is that you are responsible for the entire scope of practice, right? No matter where you practice. So it is kind of either building out your board of directors or trusted advisors that are okay, this is my pregnancy and lactation person, this is my renal person. Like, I
Yeah.
don't have to be the expert on all these. So, but yeah, that's my role at Thorne, is kind of be the sports applied science side of nutrition expert. And then wherever that goes, wherever the ask is, whoever I can support is what I do.
I think it just makes it unique because your job is never going to be boring, and you get to constantly meet and talk to different individuals amongst multiple levels
Oh, for
of
sure.
research and doctors and nutrition. And I mean, pretty much you've probably been exposed to just a spectrum of individuals at the end of the day, too.
Yeah. And that's what I love, is the idea that like sports, like everything changes in sports and people change, and as science changes, like they stay on top of it. Same thing in medicine, like they stay on top. You have to be on that cutting edge. So I'm always being challenged. If I don't know the answer, I'm like, all right, well, I will by tomorrow, right? So I get to,
Yeah.
it's like force kind of growth. And I have to continue to make myself better, because that's what my job asks of me. So
Mhm.
I love that. I never, I have no option to be complacent. I have no option to fall behind or just kind of be stuck in old methodology that I was like, well, this is what I knew then, which I think we see a ton of times.
It kind of puts you, I don't know, put you on an edge in a negative way, but puts you on edge a little bit to always be on top of your game, because there's going to be somebody in your company or somebody else that's going to come with you with something. It's like, how do I provide them the answer? Or like you said before, which I really liked, is just we can't know everything as one individual. So it's like, do I have my spectrum of individuals that I can go to, text, hit up, whatever that may be, and always have that person in my back pocket? Like, all right, you specialize in GI, you specialize in hydration, maybe more than I do. And I know if I call you up, I can talk to you for like 5-10 minutes, and automatically I'm gonna at least have a good idea or a research paper or something I can then respond to that individual with, even if, and then try to explain the best that I can.
Yeah, and I think that's again, we talk about there's a certain skill set or personality that ends up in sports and stays in sports. And for me, and you're learning a lot more on the business side too. There's different asks, right? But like I don't get judged weekly on Sunday whether the team performed well or not, right? So I had to get into that environment where I am being judged. I do win or lose every day or every week. That's how I roll. That's what motivates me and keeps me kind of fired up. So yeah, it's kind of, I found it, and we've all been places where you're like, all right, this is not a fit, and that's okay. That took me a little while to learn too, that like growing and finding out what doesn't work for you, that's not a failure. That's just part of the journey, right? So yeah, so I've been very fortunate to get in this role where I do get to be challenged every day, and that's an outside stimulus. Like we're all doing our own. I've got all my own list of like nerd things I want to catch up on, but I'm kind of forced into, like I said, it really is a responsibility both to the profession and to everyone we work with, because we are, in service of our end user. So
you can't force it in a situation that's just not going to work. Just, like you said, Rob said, just move on and have somebody else come in and take over that position. It's a better personality or better fit, and it's okay. It's okay not to fit there. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay if you have to find somewhere else because it's better for your family. I think a lot of dietitians need to hear that and know that if you have to make that change, like nobody's judging you. It's just you're doing what's the best for you at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think in sports it's really frustrating, especially when you're younger, is when your organization's vision doesn't match yours, right? Like at some point you may just do as much as they're willing to do, and they don't even know that they wanted your vision until you're gone, right? Like we've all heard it. Like
oh
person
yeah,
after you comes in with double your salary and they get everything you're asking for, and everyone's like, oh, why, why'd you leave? And like it's okay, like it's not like you built the program, like your mark is on that, right? And it's a little bit humbling to know, but like of course you want your program in good hands, right? Of course you want the person after you to be funded and getting it, so that's like I said, that's the responsibility of the industry, because as much as we've grown, we're still wildly young. Like we've got work to do in pro and then the high school market, and it's just people are expecting it and wanting it at so many different levels. So
I think that's right there. High school, highly untapped area where we have a big hole in trying to figure out how to get dietitians in that area. I know obviously Allison Maurer, Tavis Piatoli, I've been in this space for about 4 years. Jackie's been in the high school space for about 7 years at IMG Academy, but that's very minimal and very few. Like, and there's thousands and thousands of high schools out there. But it's figuring out like what's the right model that we need to put together for that space to not just consult at the high school level, but actually get dietitians in the building, whether that's a dual role with being the dietitian, but then also possibly having an academic role where you're actually teaching nutrition information or food demos or things like that. I don't think there's any perfect way right now, but like that's one of my passions, to try to get more people along with them out in the high school space that I can hopefully get to at one point.
Yeah, that's what I love about the profession. Like I mean, I'm 43 and I'm a veteran because it was so young when we were all starting, but like it's still a very young profession. So what I see, it's like, we went through it, with college and pro sports, and then getting, the military dietitians, the support and the funding they need, to now, we're looking at it in, non-traditional sports. I'm doing some work in esports, and then the high school level, we're still always just going to be advocating for the profession. Like once you sit down and get the right people in the right place and explain like, hey, you're putting all this, money or whatever into either whether it's the training of the athlete or the, operator, performer, employee, or, we've got all these we're monitoring this, we've got this great GPS tracking, and then there's no funding for the human asset. Like,
yeah,
once you have those conversations, it's always like, oh, yeah, no, of course we need to do this, but it's just a matter of having them. And I've been thinking about it like, I think about the high school setting is like, yeah, there may not be budget this year or a perceived need for each school, but the department, that's a lot what like Tavis was doing, and then the Hooten Foundation, they go around and they talk to the entire um, school
School.
system about the importance of nutrition, whatever, and that you're just growing, you just need calories, but like
Yeah.
safe supplementations. I mean, they're not drug tested, so there are some, and we're all invincible at 16, so we see a ton of like PED and kind of illegal use or just banned substances that shouldn't be in your body just because they're not informed. And I mean, obviously, the better you start habits, the earlier, then it's
Mhm.
just like you're not starting from scratch when they get to you, right? And then NBA is not starting from scratch when they get to them, so it's just good habits, and obviously that's improves performance, improves recovery, increases career longevity, just allows you to actually tap into your actual optimal potential. So, I mean, I'm super passionate about it as well. The more people we can touch, the better.
That's why when you see a lot of these high school kids and they're getting to the college level and they're just like already ready, or they've been exposed to a lot of stuff because they had a strength and conditioning coach, for
Yeah.
example. Like we're seeing that now, like at these levels, that like that's making a huge difference. So if we can get both of those tied in together at the high school level at more places, like it's just going to be
Yeah.
a game changer, and more colleges are going to be appreciative of that because they're going to have individuals coming in as a freshman instead of like, oh, I've never lifted before and I eat fast food 24/7. It's like, oh yeah, I've been training the last 4 years in high school and I know how to fuel myself appropriately coming into freshman
Yeah.
year. And it's like if you see athletes coming into freshman year ready like that already, and that we're not having to wait to develop them and get to the point where they're then ready at junior senior year, that could be a crazy thought.
Yeah, that's kind of part of the reason that actually led me to nutrition. I was a distance runner in high school, and like, I ended my career accidentally, anemic and for sure red ass and all this stuff just because I was an idiot. Like at
Mm-hmm.
power bars, that was sports nutrition, right? And they were god awful, right? But
Oh
like I
god, they're
had,
like rocks.
yeah, and like, my team, we're doing very high load. We're trying to be extremely competitive, and like all of us have these like nagging injuries now that was just because we were idiots and we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know the damage we were doing to our body, especially at a time when you're growing, right? So, yeah, the earlier we can have habits. And I was talking to somebody, and they mentioned like, this kind of generation, and they've always had access to cooking shows and Food Network, and so few of them actually cook, right? So the culinary information is there, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're actually doing themselves. So like, so much of it is just like, it's not that hard. Like, don't be scared of the kitchen, right? And it's like so much of our impact can be just that, like just the soft skills. So
It's unfortunate. It's the world of convenience where
yeah,
you can just sit in your apartment, your house, and you can order from your phone, and the food shows up, and you didn't have to move or get up or do anything. Like
yeah,
that's a hard competition and battle to go against. I mean, at the same time, too, also the social media front, from a dietitian standpoint, trying to dismiss all these random people out there that are nutritionists and
yeah,
so-called nutrition professionals or whatever you want to call them, but it's a
yeah.
different type of world out there with all this kind of stuff coming up and then being exposed to that 24/7.
That's I mean, that's an hour long podcast alone, but even if you dismiss the whole like, hey, I'm making recommendations, even if it's just someone saying like, this is what works for me, the amount of people who expect that, you don't know their genetic makeup, you don't know what's going on with them, you don't know why that worked for them, and it's not like, people are always like, can I get a diet plan? I was like, I need like nine
Oh,
thousand data points before I can. I would say you have to earn it. Like, are your calories even close? Like it doesn't matter how I break them down if you're going to be 1,000 short every day, right? But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just it's a wild time to try, and it's hard to find good information. But even then, even when you do have the information, the amount of people who just assume that it's going to work for them, and I think we need to do some work on really getting people to understand it really is a one size fit one world. You have to understand you, and sports doesn't happen in a vacuum. Everything else is happening too. So as much as there's a biological cost to being a high performing athlete, there's a biological cost to being a student, there's a biological cost to growing, there's a biological cost to being stressed, having emotional issues. Like, there's so many different things that your body has to, they're all metabolically based, or there's at least a metabolic component to everything we do. So it is kind of getting that information like, hey, and I've said this 1,000 times early in my career, I was focusing on just optimizing that top 2%, not realizing it's like a 50% human at the foundational level. Like the calories aren't there, the vitamin D is low, magnesium's off the chart, and they're not hydrating. If I fix those basic things, then I can get that 2% at the top of a 80% human. That's when you see some real changes. But like, I'm not embarrassed to say it, but it took me a long time to really realize like I'm focusing on the wrong things, and my impact is so minuscule. 2% of a 50% human that's not sleeping, not recovering, and not feeling, as opposed to, and then there's other times when like, oh, we've had such great results, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, literally we just caught up on calories and put protein at the right time, but
That's
sometimes
all.
that's all it
And
takes.
it's not sexy. It's not
Yeah.
sexy. It
Yeah.
doesn't always sell because it's not fancy and has all these bells and whistles. But these just really simplistic, basic concepts, if you can implement them in your schedule and routine day in and day out and keep on top of them, make a world of difference.
You got to treat the human and human performance first, for sure.
Like like we had a recruit coming yesterday, and I did this. I've been doing this actually a lot with recruits that have been coming in, just to not only show them but show their parents. So I'll go to a whiteboard and I'll tell them to write down fuel, hydration, and sleep, and then I'll ask them, okay, how many hours do you spend sleeping? How many hours do you think you spend eating? Do you hydrate all day or do you hydrate part of the day? And then I tell them, I go, all right, write 24 on the bottom of the board because that's 24 hours in a day. So then my next question is, I go, okay, if you count all those up, and I go, I know hydration wasn't a number, but if you count that up hypothetically, how many hours in 24 hours are you spending doing those three things? Right. And then they'll tell me, and I go, okay, well, if you divide that by 24, that's the percentage of time that you're spending doing those three things. And I go, you have to do them every day, right? Yes. Can you stop doing those? No. Do you notice when you don't do those that it's affecting you out in the court? Yeah, I've definitely felt that. And then it's just like the parents are just like, whoa, like something so simple as just writing that basic concepts on the board and just putting it in a big picture format like that. I'm like, yeah, anytime you don't sleep enough, anytime you don't eat enough, anytime you're just hydrating when you want and not all throughout the day, it's probably going to affect everything and anything that you do, decisions you make, school, practice, lift, training, competition, whatever it is, it's going to negatively affect it if you're not keeping on top of it.
Yeah, one of the most impactful things for me is I had a coach tell me, he's like, hey, athletes rarely lie. So if they're telling me this is happening, it's up to you guys to figure it out, right? Like the performance team, like maybe it's not nutrition, maybe it's not strength training, maybe it's not, rehab or whatever, muscle readiness, but something's happening to that athlete. And I think for me is getting that rapport and opening that up to let them be like, hey, like my bench is down. Like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing different, or like I'm just not feeling it today, right? Like if your body's feeling it, like it's up to us, but you have this support system to help you figure it out. Like you shouldn't I mean, how many athletes, just normalize like bad GI and they're like, oh yeah, well, that's just what happens when I take,
Oh, that's
you know,
all the time. Like,
it
it's
doesn't
just
have to be.
normal. That's just normal. Like,
Yeah.
like you shouldn't be having that going on every day or every other day. Like,
Yeah.
that's a problem.
And I mean, like talking to coaches, like you shouldn't have to make those noises when you stand up out of bed every day. Like you don't have to normalize that, right? There's a solution there,
You
and
should
that's
be
just having,
18 and creaky and everything's cracking.
yeah,
I can barely roll out of my bed in the morning.
yeah.
Like, it should be like that.
But that is the soft side, the being passionate, like public facing, so people know like, hey, I don't know if Sean has the answer, but like I know he cares about me enough to help me find it, right? And like he's not going to judge me because I only got 3 hours of sleep, because you don't know, like until I know what's going on, like, all right, well, this is your truth right now. Here's how we minimize the negative impact of that. But here's also how we work on like you having a plan for this so that this isn't a lifelong issue, right? So I think that like I said, it's just I always say you have to be in this industry, you have to be, half professor, half coach to do it, right? And in either one, you're not going to be optimal. But yeah, like it's the passion of letting athletes and clients and patients, whatever realm you go into, know like, yeah, like I'm here to help you. And you may not even know there's a nutrition component of what you're doing, but like I can generally make things suck a little bit less. I may not be able to fix them with nutrition, but I can at least, let your body handle what it's dealing with, in a more optimal way, while, sending you over to our other disciplines that may be able to help you in other ways. So,
Oh,
that
yeah.
nothing happens in a vacuum in the body. So,
Yeah. The behavioral standpoint, I mean, I credit how I look at body language, how an athlete speaks to me, the questions I ask. I attribute a lot of that to the mental conditioning staff that I worked with for 3 years before the job I'm currently at. And then where I'm currently at, we also have a sports psychologist. And anything that I'm seeing going on that could be a behavioral issue that's going to directly impact sleep, hydration, and fueling, I'm going to have a conversation with her, and we're going to try to figure out how to collaboratively work with that athlete. Whether it's they're not ready for me, they need to talk to her first, so that way she can figure out what's going on behind the scenes and hopefully provide them some skills to deal with that, which then allows me to do my job at the end of the day. Because, with, as we've seen with multiple sports, professional athletes, depression, anxiety, just dealing with different types and different levels of stress that maybe the general population don't deal with. We criticize athletes a lot. They're not having a good day. They're always hurt. They're this, they're that. But do you in reality really know what's going on behind the scene and the different types and different levels of stressors that they have to deal with every single day? It's like, if you've never been an athlete, you don't know, and you have zero clue. And social media too, then exacerbates that, because everyone's got an opinion on you as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we talk about a lot. It's in a lot of the sports specific performance professions is you don't have time to learn the soft skills. You don't get taught the coaching skills, and you have to kind of come with it. And there's a saying somebody told me early on when I was at the Pats. It's like, you have to be like whatever, seen to be heard, heard to be listened to be trusted, or trusted to have an impact or whatever. And it's understanding that. And it's, when I went from NFL to college, NFL, you're kind of peers and there's a, financial component, whatever. And then I got to college and I was like, oh, I'm like a mentor. These kids are 16 or 17, 18, 19. So, they don't, I had to establish a different rapport. I had to have a little bit more of a coaching mentorship role. And it was just like little things like, someone in my life was always like, just ask me every time I saw them, like, tell me one thing you learned today. Right. And I didn't even realize I started doing that. But then, the people are taken back. And I was like, no, literally anything. Doesn't have to be in classroom. Just one thing you learned today that you didn't know yesterday. And, that became like a habit. But then you get to know it and they're like, oh, you care about me besides like my stats on the field, and it's something as simple as that is like, and then we had, one of our guys was taking organic chemistry, and like I sat down and like talked to them, and he's like, oh wait, like you care about me academically, like I trust you with everything. Like it's you never know what that connection point is going to be, but the whole fact that just letting people know you're available, it's sometimes as simple as like, how's your day? Like it's crazy how simple that is, but we forget to do that, especially at the highest level where we assume everybody knows everything, that we're all in this together, we're all here to make everyone better, but like it is kind of sometimes that soft, like hey bud, like sometimes that's enough.
Yeah, and those little unique details make a big difference too. I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but they were talking about this parent whose son or daughter went to like an Ivy League school. And like what set the difference for them is like every time they came home, instead of like, hey, how was your day? Most time when your kids come home or whoever your significant other comes home, oh, it was good, it was fine, okay. Their question was like, did you ask any good questions today? Right? Something that ended up like engaging them to like, oh, okay, they want to know what happened my day, but they specifically want to know like what was involved with it. Or I've taken kind of stuff from a variety of different people too, where, during COVID a lot, we were fist bumping. So now I've turned the fist bump into rock, paper, scissors, shoe.
Yeah.
So now like when I go around the facility, it's a competition, not only with the players, it's a competition with the coaches.
Yeah.
And that's our own little game that we play. And when they go to the next place, right, like they're going to probably try rock, paper, scissors, shoe somebody, but no one's going to have any clue like what that means.
Yeah.
But that'll be our own little like personal thing that we've had during the time they were with us.
I mean, how many times do you pass someone in the hall and like cross them up or like finger roll, right? Like,
yep.
I left, whatever, like I said, 12, 15 years of football, and I went to a corporate job and I did a swim move past someone in the hallway, and I was like, that's not normal. That's not normal in this situation at all, but it is stuff like that. And it as much as you have to have that rapport with the athletes, you have to have it with the team too. I tell this story all the time. We were working with an athlete that only cramped or felt like they were going to cramp on game day. And we're sitting around and we're like, we did the sweat test and we did everything. We looked at, all this stuff. And it turns out he was signed to one shoe company, but didn't actually really like the way they felt. So only wore those on game day. And because of that, like spatted differently on game day and was a nervous guy who was bouncing up and down on his calves, so he was just fatiguing little muscles. And it wasn't until we were, and then, like a assistant equipment manager's like, oh, he wears the crap shoes on Sundays. So that person had solved it 6 months ago, right? But we didn't even know. Like I said, like athletes not lying. It's up to us to
Yeah.
figure out. We're just looking at all these, and I was like, oh, man, like how did we not think about what's different on Sunday? It's only happening on Sunday, right? So that's the kind of thing. Like you, as much as you have to have the interpersonal skills with your athletes, your clients, whatever, you have to have it with your resource and supporting team around you. And, it's all, win or lose together, and rising tides lift all ships, and every cliche you want to put, but they're real for a reason. So
The answer's in the details.
for sure.
Oh, I think one question I definitely wanted to ask you, because I'm sure this is kind of a nutrition debate type of question, is obviously we all have a food first approach as
Yeah.
dietitians. In your eyes, in your opinion, do you feel supplements for athletes are necessary, especially with specific nutrients being very challenging to get athletes to eat enough of them within their meals and snacks throughout the day? Do you feel there's some supplements and some nutrients that it's just, I don't think we're going to get to a point if we don't supplement, we may never get them in that optimal range?
Yeah. I think if the end goal is optimal for, the situation we're giving them, you have to quantify one, what is the, like I said, the biological cost of doing everything, right? And then look at, okay, is there a meal plan that I can build in a perfect world where I'm providing them with food that can actually hit that, right? But then you start looking at, okay, do they have food avoidances? Do they have allergies? Do they have intolerances? Like what nutrients aren't they going to get in? And then what are the demands? What are higher than average? We looked at, kind of a cohort of people going into the NFL combine, all coming from Power Five. And we looked at like, recommended um levels of nutrients, and then what science will say like there's some research behind like optimal for performance, not just survival. And it was like 90% of them had like 4 or 5 markers, and looking at like omega-3 and magnesium and vitamin D are the big three that I don't find a diet normally um sufficient in. And I kind of always look at supplements are an option. They're a tool in the belt, right? You can change your behaviors, you can change your food sources, or sometimes supplementation is the answer. But yeah, going back to the food first philosophy, it's hard now to make a house out of bricks. That's just the foundational things. You need a little bit of mortar, but you for sure can't build a house out of mortar, right? So,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I look at it. Like, like for me, I know I've got certain foods I don't, I'm like, there's certain foods I just are not going to be a huge part of my diet. So I know those nutrients, and I have to figure it out. Is it either, am I going to blend those foods up that I, have a taste aversion to, or like, all right, what's other sources of say soluble fiber? Like, all right, maybe I'm like, there was a while, like just for convenience, I was like blending up like celery and using that as my celery juice as like the base of like my pre-workout, just so I could have, which is dumb because it was probably definitely slowing down some nutrients, but but I was like, hey, I need more fiber. Like it's literally, I'm at the salad bar, there's celery there. It's got a high water component, high fiber component. I need both of those. I'm just gonna do it. Was it delicious? I actually really like the taste of it, but you know what I mean? Like, so it is just that thing of like, what's going to be true for you, what's real for you, and what's sustainable for you. And if supplements have answered that, awesome. But then I also think, we have to, going back to the earlier question about medical nutrition therapy, like if we're asking this much out of an athlete, we kind of have a responsibility to know their blood work and know what they are actually deficient in. And to like, if in ICU, I wouldn't write a TPN or a tube feed without lab values, without magnesium values of calcium levels. So I think there is a responsibility, and I think it's scary because there's so much to learn about the supplement industry, and that's where it is like, having your trusted resources. So I think there is a responsibility to look at, is supplementation an answer? Where are we suboptimal, and what needs to be true for this athlete to do what we're asking to do, and do it day after day and peak at the right time of the season. Like there's a crazy amount of science involved in that. Like I said, biology is simple, or relatively simple once you get into it and once you're fluent in it. But the stimulus and the variables and questions you're asking that biological metabolic system to work in, that's when you really have a responsibility to understand, am I actually providing the nutrients? So I think for most people that we're asking to do what they do to their body, I think it's combination of access and nutrients and food supply falling off to just the demands and the extra nutrients they're burning through. I think it's hard to design a diet, and then even when you do design that diet, it's even harder to get compliance to that diet, or design that diet and then also fit the calorie needs and the macros they need within it. Like
And then just
One,
thinking about the age group that we're working with too, right? Like if you're working with, let's say, high school, I don't know, let's say
yeah,
14 up to guys in their mid 20s, right? Some of their palates and types of foods,
yeah,
they may in that first initial range not like anything
yeah,
or not be willing to try it, or they grow up in an environment where they only had certain types of food because that's all that was available to them, especially depending on, their economic background and how they grew up there. So then it's like, omega 3s, if you're not eating fatty fish on a regular, well,
yeah,
you get plant-based sources, but that doesn't mean it's going to be readily available and absorbed as well. You go to vitamin D, or if you got a person that's lactose intolerant, like, okay, we're getting it from a plant-based milk, but does that absorb as well? And then you go to magnesium. Okay, if you don't like dark leafy greens, you don't like beans, you don't like nuts, peanut butter. I mean, there's just
yeah.
those specific groups that we're getting those nutrients from. And if you're just almost cutting it out, or you just don't like that specific food group, it's like now we're already set behind. Or it's going to be challenging to try to figure out a way to get enough of those other options to even equate to what you would need to have an optimal level.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when we're kind of calculating that, so many times, and I'm guilty of it myself in my past, is we forget to understand what the metabolic needs of everything else that's happening. Like high school kids, you're growing. Do you know how many calories that needs? Now you're trying to be an athlete on top. It's just insane amount of calories. And then, like we talk about, like so few people talk about the caloric and the kind of metabolic cascade that happens after concussion. It's wildly metabolic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no drive to eat, right? Like, are we feeling that? Like the amount of like you're recovering from surgery, like we account for it clinically. What are we doing here? And then yeah, so maybe their physical activity has dropped because they're not, but like what is actual demands and what nutrients are different recovering that are then from, so it's just it's why we have jobs, like it's just so complicated, man. Like
Food's never going to
I
go anywhere. So I always tell everybody, I have one of the most secure jobs in
yeah,
the country. Even if it's not in sports, there's going to be a job somewhere for me with nutrition.
yeah.
'Cause food's not going to go obsolete anytime
I
soon.
mean, I always put up the huge metabolic map, on a slide, I was like, anytime you tell me it's just food, this is what's happening, right? Like you tell me where you're an expert in this area, right? And it's just
Yeah, good
once
luck.
people are like, oh shit, like nutrition really does touch everything and I have to account for everything. And I was like, yeah, it's a lot. Like it's not an easy job and we did a lot of schooling to get here. So that's where I think kind of highlighting how intricate it is kind of also helps. Like, are you really going to trust that person on Instagram? like
Are you going to really trust that nutritionist?
right, yeah, and it's
They
like,
got a
hey,
they got a cert over 3 days.
yeah, I was like, would you go to a surgeon that had a weekend course? You know, for sure
Instant
not.
answer.
So
No, I wouldn't do that. Okay, then why would you do
yeah,
this?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like,
sometimes
are you just gonna,
you gotta
yeah,
challenge individuals a little bit with some of those type of questions and just get them to actually think outside the box because sometimes they're thinking so narrow at
yeah. Like
times.
I'm not taking a NASCAR to my uncle's buddy that fixes cars, for fun on the side. You have to know what you don't know, and you have to know the intricacy and the questions to ask. And it's just, I mean, it's mind blowing once you stop and think back, like, I have to account for all of this. I have to ask all these questions. I have to have all this information to make the actual true targeted nutrition recommendation for what is actually happening for you right now. So I think
Yeah.
that's where like the rise of data and the rise of, access to blood work and all that stuff is the barrier is shrinking, right? But again, data without interpretation, that's just numbers. So, we have to make sure we have the so what if we're going to measure it. So yeah, it's a fun time to be in the industry, man. And like you said, we're always going to be challenged. There's never going to be a boring day, and I'm never going to feel like I know anything. I know more than I did 20 years ago, but now I know how little I knew at the time, and how little I know now and how much more there is for me to learn. So it's just it's kind of fun that it's a never-ending story, right?
Yes.
Because even if I got, wildly expert at everything that is today, three new studies come out tomorrow, three new data points come out tomorrow, and everything I knew is challenged. So it's great. It's so
Yeah.
fun.
It's a little monotonous because your mind's just like, oh, I'm never gonna be ahead. But then you have to just figure out how to reason with yourself, like, it's okay, I'm never gonna get to this point. As long as I keep learning and I keep helping people or keep
Yeah.
serving people, like that's the overall goal at the end of the day. I can't be 100% expert in 50 different things.
Yeah, but I get to be a part of this emerging
Which
science, and I get to never be complacent and never be done, and like yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want that? It's like
Keeps driving you and it keeps
yeah,
you passionate at the end of the
yeah.
day.
And like, I go down so many rabbit holes and I was like, shoot, now I need to, who has the best podcast on this? I have to know more about this, right? Because I know how many things this can impact. And that's why I love working with interdisciplinary teams. Like they'll ask you a question, and you're like, never thought about it from that lens. What is my answer to that and why? Right. And then your philosophy gets better. And that's when you get to like, this is like how you handle an athlete and how I handle an athlete is very different, right? We're both expert practitioners, but you've got your own philosophy because you've been asked enough questions, made enough mistakes, as I kind of mentioned earlier. But like I love being challenged. I love having a person being like, hey, my so and so told me this. I was like, all right, my head says no, but like, why are they thinking that, right? And I get to understand, and maybe I'll look at something different. I was like, all right, well, that didn't work for the reason they said it did, but here's why it actually worked, right? And like, I get to
Yeah.
prove why things are happening and understand, and I just get better doing it, and my ability to help others gets better by doing that. So it's I love
It's
it.
always
I love the profession.
it's always fun asking those questions. We're just like, where'd you get that from? Or like, what did they tell you? It just kind of like ask the questions first here, not initially coming off at like, no, that person's stupid. They don't know anything. Like, don't listen to
Yeah,
it. It's like, all right, where is that coming from first? Are they credentialed? Is somebody I don't know about yet? And
yeah,
then just try to have like you said, the soft skills and a better approach from that
yeah.
perspective. So that way the athlete doesn't get turned off right away. Because
And
that can,
and understanding, like, I mean, so many times we've seen it where someone's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go vegan." And you're like, "Cool. This is what's gonna happen." Like, I think again,
do you know how to get
Rob,
protein? Do you know how to get B12? Do you know
yeah,
how to get
yeah,
zinc? Like, do you know what foods have these in it? And if you're saying no, 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 well, let me just tell you, you might want to actually rethink, is that going to be the best thing for you?
right.
And are you going to be able to sustain that type of lifestyle?
But also, like, what's the compromise? Like, all right, like, let's do this now, and like, we'll
Mm-hmm.
make a transition to fish based or whatever. But it's another I'm stealing from Rob Skinner again. I'm fairly certain to say somebody said, "Hey, there is no yes and no. There's yes if or no unless," and like going into that, but like also your capital, like, why not capitalize on their desire to make a change? Be like, all right, we could do this, but like, what are you actually trying to get? Like, all right, let's do this because you're potentially going to lose this, but I'm with you in the middle, and like sometimes like a committed person that's going to focus and be compliant every day, even if they're not doing it 100% the way you want, if it's going to be better than what they were doing, like it's a teaching moment. Like it's so easy to just say no and be standoffish, be like, that's dumb,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that is dumb, but like, here's how I can make this beneficial for you, and here's how we can be establishing good patterns for as you trust me and move more and realize what you actually think you want or what you actually want out
Yeah.
of whatever this diet change or this program, whatever. But like, that's on us to make things work as best as they can for whatever your truths are at that moment.
You got to meet them halfway. And
Yeah.
like you said, you got to figure out, what do you want out of this? Because probably what you really want doesn't mean that we necessarily need 100% do this, but at least give you the tools and skills to be able to like transition to this. But hopefully you come to the decision on your own to know if this is going to be a long-term solution and you're getting what you want out of it.
Yeah. It's making sure you have a informed customer, consumer, client, whatever. Like the more informed they are, one, the more able they are to take your advice, and two, they're able to be like, I never say I told you so, but I like when people come back and like,
Mm.
you're right, you're right, you're right.
No.
Like, and then everything you say after that holds a little bit more weight because they're like, all right, you said it was going to happen. This is what I'm feeling. How do I keep doing as much of what I want to do, but still make sure this isn't, a thing where I'm losing strength or losing power or whatnot. So yeah, like I said, it's the soft side. It's a huge part of the industry, and I think it's under talked about side. So that's why conversations like this and what you're doing are super important.
Yeah, I mean, my whole goal of this is, not only for dietitians, but try to bring as many different practitioners on to show, one, how do we all work and collaborate together to essentially serve and help the athlete? But two, can you connect with some of these individuals and learn from other disciplines as well, right? Like we can't all do this in a bubble by ourselves. Like there's so many things that cross over into one another
Yeah,
that are impact each other, that we're going to be more of a powerful whole or unit if we can figure out how to do it as one group.
preach, brother.
So last thing I want to kind of wrap up with is, being with the vast amount of experience that you have, there's so many young dietitians in the field. Maybe what is like two of your top three tips of wisdom for dietitians that are coming up that you would pass on to them that maybe you didn't know or you wish you knew as you were kind of coming through the field that could maybe be helpful for them in their current stage?
Yeah, we touched on kind of the biggest one is building that kind of, being the CEO of you, and building that kind of board of advisors, and building your group around you, because you can't do it alone. And like, it's such unique, weird stressors in the industry. Not even what should I do clinically, but like, how do I survive this? How do I manage this? How do I balance that? So like, one, like being vulnerable and having that group that you can be like, dude, I'm struggling today, or like, I don't know how I'm getting through OTAs or getting through training camp, right? Having that kind of mentorship. Like I said, I still have a group text with, some of the original 20, and like, but like I have conversations with you. Like, your mentors can be anyone, your peer support group can be anyone, and someone's going to be an expert on something. But so just knowing that even if your position puts you in the, like the smartest person on the island, or like, a lone wolf, just because that position doesn't necessarily have the support around it, especially as you're starting to fight for high school and whatnot. Like, how do I even sell this, right? Somebody around you will have an answer, or know somebody that will. So you're not supposed to do it alone. It's impossible. But the one thing I say as far as like professional development is kind of, I would say your 5-year plan starts year 2. Year 1 is just don't get fired, understand the politics, understand what
Yeah.
job you're actually being asked to do. Because sometimes the job we want to do, and the job, like the decision makers, the people who care, or make decisions on your job, we want you to do something completely different. And sometimes you have to make sure, all right, let me just win this. Yes, I can't boil the ocean, right? But it's okay. It's okay. You're not failing if you don't have the perfect program, 3 weeks in, right? So it is,
Mhm.
but there is understanding that, the politics and the kind of what works here, what's impactful here, what can I do within the parameters that are here, and then what do I have to start challenging. I think those are two kind of the biggest, like, sustainability, survivability things. But yeah, you also have to like kind of be always have the growth mindset, always be identifying like you're not supposed to be great at everything, right? But like, hey, like, all right, I'm working in this high school thing, I need to learn a little bit more about, learning styles, or what a 16-year-old is doing right now, what's true for them. Like, oh, you can't send emails, that doesn't work, but like, if I came in there and tried to do it the way I did it 20 years ago, they're like, bro, like, so it just figure out how they learn what they do. So it just, what's real for you, what's real of the situation you're in, and then how do you adapt to it. And I think that's kind of learning that soft skill, and really coaching up your soft skill. Like, you can't just read all nutrition books, like in nutrition studies. Like, you have to figure out your philosophy. And I guess the last thing I would kind of sum up with is, you're not it takes 5 years to be an expert in what your philosophy is, right? Like I said, when you're asked questions, you find, like, you do things in your head, it, but you've never verbalized them, right? And you've never actually been like, okay, well, this is defensively why I do what this is, and then be like, actually, I don't know. I mean, that's just what I've done. I don't know why I do it. So, you know what I mean? Like, so the more questions you're asked, the more mistakes you make. That's how it usually takes 3 to 5 years before you have like the foundation of like, this is how I do sports nutrition. And it's okay to do it differently than your mentor, and find mentors. Doesn't have to be in the industry. Just find mentors, somebody who's better at what you want to do, and your mentors can be older than you, younger than you, different profession, same profession. Like, it's that's my all my wisdom summed up in 2 sentences, or 12 probably. But yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things off of that I like that you said is, everyone always says, "Well, who do you look up to? Who's your mentor?" And I say, "Well, I take something from everybody."
Yeah.
Right. That's essentially what helped me develop my philosophy and my identity and like who I am. Like, do I like everything that everybody did throughout my coming up through the field? No, but everyone also probably had stuff that was really key and good. I'm like, okay, I can relate to that. I think that something's going to work for me. I think it's something that's going to allow me to help get better in this specific section of sports nutrition that maybe I wasn't good before, but they're really good at it. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions and see how that works for me when I start to get into those similar situations, where I'm not yet, but then I'm going to get into, but at least have a base level of skills or someone that I can kind of refer to.
Yeah, I think your point there is, I've actually never, I don't know if I've ever said that out loud, but thinking about it, I think I got to my personal philosophy faster. negative stimulus of what I don't want to be and how I don't want to make people feel that I've been made felt. So I think you're right. Like it's when you're in the environment dealing with a toxic person or difficult person, it's really, but then you're like, oh, I know 9 things I'm never going to do. Right. So that's, you just get there a little bit faster. So there is something positive to be taken away from every interaction for sure.
Yeah, I would say that the benefit that I had is I had a lot of people that practitioners that weren't there to be your friend. They were there to like make you a professional. So they were going to tell you the real information that you needed to know that was going to allow me, like you said, to progress a little bit faster than others around me. And they weren't afraid to provide constructive criticism. But then it takes the other individual, like myself, being able to accept the constructive criticism and what am I going to do with it? Like, am I going to get mad? Am I going to get upset? Am I going to say they don't know what they're talking about? Or let's read between the lines of what they're actually saying to me and how is this actually helping me? And they're probably saying it because they see something in you as an individual that they want you to get better and that they see that you're going to have probably a good career. So they're going to be a little bit harder on you at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you've got someone that cares enough to be critiquing you, it means you're at least you're doing something or they're seeing something. And, like, I mean, I was an idiot. I'm still an idiot sometimes. Right. And sometimes it's somebody has to be like, what are you doing, man? Or like,
Yeah.
that's not, you're not helping yourself by doing it that way. Or like, I used to be a little bit more like, challenge somebody like directly as opposed to be like for a while I was, prefacing, hey, I'm asking, not telling, because I know like the way, like what are we doing for this? It can be taken the wrong way, and I'm like, no,
Yeah.
literally, I want to know everything you're doing, your thought process, so that I can be making sure, like if I don't know what the actual surgery, like what a bank heart surgery is and what the recovery for that is, if I don't know that, I can't fuel for it. But it's me asking, like seeking and understand, not being like I'm questioning while you're doing it. And especially at the highest level, when you've been around, there can be some, toxic people that are challenging you just because they're challenging you for no reason, right? Like, so
Mhm.
that took me a little while to learn, like, one, ask the questions the right way, but two, again, having that relationship where they're like, oh, Joel just like, here's the paper, read it, like, but yeah, it is how people are saying things and how you interpret them. Like, we're seeing it's way worse over text and email because there's no,
Oh my gosh.
visual. And like, I'm a
It's
sarcastic guy and I've gone, places where sarcasm isn't as common. And like, people, like, I've offended people for like months just because I was like being sarcastic. So,
I know you can't even say anything funny or joking anymore because it gets just taken out of context. I mean, I literally am at a point now where when I talk to athletes, when I do their like one-on-one assessment, when I first meet with them, like day one, square one, on the back of my paper, I ask, how do you want to be communicated with? So I'll ask, is it FaceTime? Is it text? Is it phone call? Is it you want me to pull you over to the side when you're in the facility and talk to you face to face? Like, you need to tell me how you want me to communicate. And then not only will I ask that, the second question I follow up with is, how do you learn? How do you want me to present information to you? Is it visual? Is it tactile? Is it you just like to read stuff? Like, how do you want me to provide that to you? So that way I know how you like to have a conversation or how you want to communicate. Because a lot of times, like you said, emails or maybe we're texting them and no one's responding, and then we're getting upset because the athlete or the individual doesn't want to respond. Well, maybe they just don't prefer that way. Not that they shouldn't be getting better at that, but if you're trying to get quick information out of them and I got to just call them up and that's how they function better, cool. That's what I'm going to do. Hey, you'd like to see a visual of this infographic instead of reading this paragraph? Cool. I'll just send you a visual. If that gets you to figure it out and apply it better, that's what we're going to do. And just adapting to the person sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that took me a little while is to realize, like, there's, certain people that if they're not texters anymore or whatever, like when they get a text from somebody of like authority or whatever, like and instantly have a negative reaction, like I'm like challenging them or like checking on them, and it would be like, hey, did you have breakfast today or whatever? And if they're not like a text person and they're like, oh man, like, this is so, like, I have such a negative response to like being checked on, like, you're grading me or you're gonna tell coach or like whatever, like, and I'm literally like, I just want positive reinforcement. That's what I'm trying to do, right? But what I'm trying to do and what they're receiving, the same exact words, like, it's a skill and it's something you have to continue to do, continuing education and personal growth on, like, you can get better at it 100%, and you have to in order to be impactful. So, I mean, I love everything you're saying.
Yeah, that's a game changer. Communication, lost art, and that's a whole nother conversation too. But Joel, really appreciate you taking the time to come on today. Where can people reach you at? Like if they wanted to have a conversation like this one-on-one with you, what's the best ways to contact you?
Yeah, so emails, jtotoro@thorne.com. I'm on Instagram. I don't really post as much, but jctotoro there. But as far as the educational resources, and thorne.com has their section called Take 5 Daily, and it's full of there's new articles out every day, which is, and they're all referenced, so it's always a jump off to be like, all right, I want to read more about that. Thorne does have a podcast, and so we have a pretty in-depth, we go pretty deep on some medical topics, or clinical topics in the science, and then I kind of host a similar like performance podcast. So whether it's the athletes we're working with, how do you interact with nutrition, or practitioners that are in the field that are just doing something cool or passionate about it. So that's always just another way, if you're an audible learner as opposed to a reading learner, there's different ways to get the information. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm one of a small percentage of the smart minds we have at Thorne, so you got to have access to all their thoughts too on the podcast and the blog. So it's kind of where I live for the most part. But yeah, I mean, obviously passionate about the industry and could talk about this for days. And I've talked about mentorship and how important it's been for me. So if I can provide some guidance to anyone, or share my errors and and what I've done wrong, and prevent some errors for anybody else, happy to do that as well. So yeah, really love what you're doing, and kind of the help putting out some of these conversations that need to be had. And so many of us think we're the only one dealing, especially when they're in the middle of the grind, we think we're the only one dealing with it. And we need to normalize, I think, talking about it. And it's a hard profession to work in, and everyone only sees the glories. Nobody sees that there's anything besides the game day itself. So we know, and we've felt it. So yeah, I love what you're doing, and the love you're spreading.
I appreciate it. All that information, his contact information, it'll be in the show notes. All my contact information is on my link tree, my digital links. I provide daily content, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, free information for those that are out there that want to try to get better in both those spaces, whether it's nutrition. My fiance is a strength and conditioning coach, so she posts stuff on there as well. So we kind of have that dual collaboration again to show how both of those entities kind of work together hand in hand. But again, Joel, really appreciate your time. And I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot of gems and a lot of nuggets out of this chat we had today.
Oh, thanks for having me on.